We're going to record this on the computer here and start the video and share the screen. And so let's go to it right here. So Article 1, we've kind of covered that. Don't forget that when we talk about Article 1, that the most important piece is the Article 1, Section 8, which is the enumerated list of all the powers of the Congress, which is the power really of our country. The early ones are mainly economic powers and that kind of thing. Don't forget the Commerce Clause, and don't forget, you know, the Supremacy Clause in regards to that in terms of congressional power. But at any rate, the next article is Article 2, which you've already answered questions about. Now, let's look, do some comparison of who has become our presidents. There's been 44 men, sorry, no women yet. That's going to change sometime. We hope sooner than later, but nevertheless, the right woman comes along and wins the presidency. But only 45 people, excuse me, 45 men have been president, but there's been 45 presidents. Now, we got to this before. Who was the president? Do you know? Who was the president who won and then lost and then won again? You guys know? Maybe we didn't talk about him in this class. Well, it was Grover Cleveland. He was the 22nd and 24th president. What happened was this. He wins barely as a Democrat, the only Democrat in that whole era that wins. I mean, it was Republican, 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 him, and then a Republican, then him, and the Republican again. He was a big business kind of robber baron kind of supporter. So that's one reason why he was able to get the money to pull it off. But anyway, the point is, he's the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. So he wins a narrow victory, but then in the next election, he wins the popular vote as he did before, but loses in the Electoral College to Harrison. Harrison was a one-termer. He comes back, wins again, popular vote, and then he's able to win in the Electoral College too. So this is kind of an important story, especially if you consider that President Trump might try again. So he would be the second president ever to be non-consecutively elected, and that would make future President Trump, if he wins, which number? 47. Yeah. So he'd be 45 and 47, right? Other presidents have tried. U.S. Grant tried. He took 4 years out and didn't like what was going on, so he ran again, but didn't get the nomination for his party, the Republican Party. Teddy Roosevelt, same thing. He basically retired after serving about 7 years. So he took over after McKinley was assassinated. And then he goes on safari and he goes to Brazil on an exploration of a river and almost dies there. You know, it was very much, you know, Jungle Cruise type stuff. But the point is that he comes back and didn't realize that he'd become the most famous person in the world. People were following him everywhere. But he was not happy with the job that the President Taft was doing. Who was his handpicked successor, by the way? Because he wasn't progressive enough. So what Roosevelt did was he tried to get the nomination away from Taft, but Taft had control of the political apparatus and got the nomination as a Republican. So he goes out and does what very few people do, and that is start his own political party. His political party was known as the Progressive Party. And as the Progressive Party candidate, he was doing really well. And he goes up in Wisconsin and he's going to give a speech. And he's got his speech folded in his coat pocket. He's a big guy. And at a hotel entrance, I've actually stood at the very spot in Milwaukee where this trial right now is taking place, right? An assassin comes up and shoots him right in the chest. But the bullet was impeded in its progress because of the speech. Yes, he was wounded. Yes, there was blood. He goes out and does the speech anyway. Then they rush him to Chicago, which is not too far away, for surgery, and he comes out of it and people are worried about his health. This could have hurt his campaign. So he said, no, I'm as strong as a bull moose. And so his party name from that point on was affectionately called the Bull Moose Party. And that's how we get that. Teddy Roosevelt, but he didn't win. He barely lost. The thing is, the Republicans split the vote between Taft and him. Utah, interestingly enough, voted for Taft in that election. But Woodrow Wilson won with a plurality because the 2 Republicans split the vote. Meanwhile, 12 of our presidents have been generals, including first George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Harrison, Taylor, Pierce, Johnson. Andrew Johnson was the wartime general governor over Tennessee, his home state, became vice president. Ulysses Grant, the greatest general we've ever seen, won the American Civil War. Rutherford B. Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Harrison, and then Eisenhower. Now, you notice what happened after the Civil War, right? You didn't really have a chance to run unless you had a war record and served in the Union Army. So these are Union generals, Union general, Union general, Union general. Okay, that just became kind of a thing in that era. Of course, when they all got too old, that stopped. But then Eisenhower would be the last one. Now, none of them can be an active general at the time. You have to be a civilian. But the last one was Dwight D. Eisenhower, who led the attack in D-Day and that reconquered Europe. 26 have been lawyers. That's quite a number. In fact, if you're going to go for president, you should probably go to law school. It would help. John Adams was the first, and he was a Federalist in terms of policy, 1796. Very interesting guy. The last one to be a lawyer was Harvard trained, both of them Harvard trained, Democrat in 2008. He also is going to make the next list too, because he is, I'm going to jump ahead. 5 were professors, including Obama. Garfield, Taft, Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, he became college president too. So he had academic background. So did Clinton. Clinton taught classes in Arkansas, law classes, while he was governor there, as did his wife, Hillary Clinton. Okay, so being a lawyer might be a good way to get to the presidency. 6 have been businessmen, right? Warren G. Harding, he was a newspaper publisher. His administration was tremendously corrupt. Oh my goodness, that one right there. Grant, this one, and the last one we just had were the most corrupt presidencies in our history. Hoover had the unfortunate responsibility of being president when the stock market crashed. And now he's one of only 2 presidents who never held elected office before. He, however, was the Commerce Secretary. So it's not like he wasn't involved in government. A lot of charity work. We're going to compare these two. Trump, no elected office before. He's a real estate developer. George W. Bush, right, H.W. Bush, moved from Connecticut, where his father was a senator. So he comes from basically a political family, but he goes to Texas to make his money in the oil industry and did. His son followed in his footsteps and also became owner of the Texas Rangers. So they must have done pretty well in oil. Jimmy Carter owned a peanut farm. Harry Truman owned a small store, which can only might be described as a fancy 7-Eleven or something. But that's our presidents who've had business background. This, of course, is Trump Properties in what city is this? That's Vegas, right? There's Mar-a-Lago, his famous resort where he has in Florida, and this is Bedminster, which is one of the top golf courses in the country. 2 were actors. That included Ronald Reagan, who, by the way, one of my favorites because I loved this movie as a kid, Bedtime for Bonzo, a precocious chimpanzee that escapes and allows Ronald Reagan here to fall in love with the co-star. Reagan was a household name though, because he did a thing called Death Valley Days every Sunday night, and everybody loved. This was the Western of the week. This is when Westerns were kind of like, I don't know, the thing. And he would always introduce it. Sometimes he even starred in his own. He was a pitch man. Here he is pitching cigarettes, ouch. But his big product was 20-multene borax. Borax was a product mined in the Mojave Desert, and originally they brought it out on mule teams. It's really heavy, and it's just a cleaning agent. But he was a household name, so he didn't have to worry about name ID. Neither did this guy. The other actor was Donald Trump. He held no elective office either, but here's the thing. He was on a show, very popular show, top 10 show, The Apprentice, and then when it started to wane a little bit, they just made it a Celebrity Apprentice. And here he is with Ivanka and his son as judges, and he's the guy famous now, "You're fired," and that was his tagline. As they'd had confidence, basically it was like Survivor for business activities. Okay, that's what it was about. It bailed him out economically. He had run himself. He inherited $400 million from his father, lost it all in the casino industry in Atlantic City. And this bailed him out. He made several $100 million doing this show. It was very, very popular for about 16 years. Again, 5 were professors, including Barack Obama, Clinton, Wilson, so on. Other qualifying jobs, most won elective office first. If you want to prepare, become a governor. 17 have been governors. 17 have been senators. So that's the next path. And 15 of those have been vice president. Look at Kamala Harris. She's both a senator and a vice president, as was Biden. So that looks like a good path. somehow be a senator or a governor and then be vice president too. You become a household name, people get to know you, they know your record. 7 cabinet secretaries, including really early on in our history, Secretary of State was the way to get there. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, all were secretaries of state, as was John Quincy Adams. 1 Commerce Secretary, that was, of course, Hoover. 8 died in office. This is a tragically high number. This is a death rate beyond normal of anything. 4 were assassinated. That was Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. 4 died of natural causes: Harrison, Taylor, Harding, and FDR with cerebral hemorrhage. This, of course, gives us 4 presidents, well, 8 presidents rather, because the point is they have to be succeeded by their vice president. Now, I can tell you for a fact, you never want to live through the death of a president. Once in a while, I'll get a student who will say something that they shouldn't about the president, And as our 2 presidents, the last 2 have been the oldest in history. I mean, it's Reagan, Trump, Biden in terms of oldest. It comes up a lot. Are they even going to make it through, right? But you never want to see it. I don't care who it is. Never, never, never go there. I've lived through the one. It's so traumatic. It tears the country apart. This is the most famous scene from the Kennedy assassination. Here's Jackie Kennedy, his wife, and it looks like she's trying to flee the scene. Her husband is already humbled over, dead, and wounded as the governor of Texas. She was in between them. This Secret Service agent literally ran from the car behind as this car is speeding off, barely latches on, and realized she's not trying to get out of the car. The scene was so bloody and ugly. She's trying to hide it from the public because she loved her husband and didn't want to see this mess. And he realized that quickly, and he got his coat off and he put it over the body. As she tried to protect her husband in this frantic moment. You don't want to go through this. Trust me, it's not worth it. Just don't. We almost had it happen to Ronald Reagan. He was shot by a guy by the name of Hinckley, who had mental illness problems, who tried to stalk Jimmy Carter and tried to kill him. He was trying to impress an actress by the name of Jodie Foster. I don't know if you know who that is. But anyway, after a speech in DC, he walks up and tries to shoot the president with a small handgun, and he fatally wounded, not fatally wounded, but injured one guy who became paralyzed for the rest of his life, with a press secretary. Reagan was shot. And then they rushed him to the hospital. He made it look like it was no big deal, but it was a very serious thing. And he was probably without oxygen for a while, and it precipitated, or at least accelerated, we think, his dementia. He was never the same after. And this was early in his presidency, but he'd had the presence of mind that as soon as he could get up, he waved to all the reporters and everybody on the street, well-wishers, how are you doing, with his wife, Nancy, smiling on. When he goes into the surgery, he laughingly looked up to the doctors and said, I hope you're all Republicans. He was still able to make jokes right till the last minute, but it was very serious. And he was never the same since. So we don't want to see this ever happen. Of course, Lincoln was killed by a famous actor at the time who was also a Confederate spy. What was his name? John Wilkes Booth, who was a Shakespearean actor who was also a Confederate spy. Garfield was killed by a supporter who, because of Andrew Jackson's spoils system, felt like he helped Garfield get the nomination, helped him get elected, that he should become the ambassador to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And when he was refused that job again and again, he stalks the president and shoots him right in front of his own son and Abraham Lincoln's son too. This ended the spoils system. We passed a law now. So if you work for the federal government, there's an act called the Pendleton Act, very important. The Pendleton Act says no politics involved in hiring. If you want to join the CDC, it's strictly based on your qualifications. Do you have the right degree? Do you have the ability? Do you have the skills? They cannot ask you what political party you're on. It'll get that person fired. It cannot be. The government positions are nonpartisan. It doesn't matter what party or how you vote. It's really important to remember that. I've had a friend of mine, for example, who got his PhD. By the way, it's all degrees now. He got his PhD and then did a 2-year internship in Germany and became one of the leading experts at the patent office. And his responsibility was over all laser patents. Anything that had to do with lasers, it came to him. What a great job. but it took a PhD to do it. And he also worked at Los Alamos, and he also worked for the Navy as a scientist. These are the kinds of jobs you can get, but you need the skills. And that's what I'm trying to teach you with this assignment. I want you to know that the skills matter, not your politics, if you're going to be a government worker and work for the government. Okay, so you got to be good with the maths. You got to be good with this stuff and spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully this assignment will help you. McKinley was killed by an assassin and opened the door to the youngest president ever to be president. And his name was Theodore Roosevelt, right? He was not the youngest elected president. The youngest elected president was John Kennedy, right? Obama was really young. Clinton was really young. But those are kind of our youngest presidents. Kennedy was the youngest elected president, however. And yeah, won a tough campaign against Richard Nixon, right? The former vice president, who did go on 4 years later to win the presidency. So that's kind of our rundown there. I think that's a pretty good list of who became our presidents. And I'll just post this too for those who maybe were doing other things right now or weren't here today. And you'll be able to